The courtroom was more crowded than ever before. Every seat was taken, every aisle packed with cameras, notepads, and whispers. Reporters leaned over the railings, fans gathered outside, all waiting for one man, the one no one ever expected to see on the witness stand, Jay-Z. He entered with quiet authority, sharply dressed, his face unreadable, but beneath his composed demeanor, tension lingered. This wasn't a Grammy stage, nor a high-stakes business deal, this was a federal courtroom. And sitting on the defense bench was the man he once toasted champagne with, Sean Diddy Combs, staring straight ahead like a statue. Jay-Z took the witness seat, and the room fell into complete silence. The judge gave a subtle nod. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Please state your full name for the record." Jay-Z leaned into the microphone, Sean Corey Carter. A few gasps rippled through the gallery, just hearing that name under oath felt surreal. "Do you understand why you've been subpoenaed to testify here today?" "Yes," he replied. "And are you aware that your testimony is under penalty of perjury?" "I am." Then came the question that froze the room. During your years of association with Mr. Combs, did you ever witness any behaviors or circumstances that may be relevant to this investigation? Jay-Z exhaled slowly, "Yes. And for a long time, I chose to stay silent." The room tensed. Diddy didn't blink, only once. "Why now?" the prosecutor asked. "Because the truth has weight, and it doesn't go away. I've carried it. We all have. But what's happening in this courtroom, it's bigger than music, bigger than loyalty." "Let's talk about the parties," the prosecutor continued. "The private ones, the ones few people were invited to." Jay-Z's expression darkened. There were events that didn't feel like celebrations, they felt orchestrated, selective, controlled. Certain people would arrive late, always through the back entrances. They never appeared in public photos, never mingled with the crowd. "Who were they?" "I don't know all their names," he said. "But they were always young, male. Sometimes they looked confused, nervous." The judge raised an eyebrow, the jury leaned in. "Did you ever ask Diddy about them?" Jay-Z hesitated. "One time, I joked about how he always disappeared into the private wing with his guests. He gave me a look that shut me down. He said, 'Not everything's for everyone, Jay.' I never brought it up again." "Did that disturb you?" Jay-Z nodded. "Yes, it did." "Why didn't you speak out then?" He looked down for a moment. "Because I didn't want to believe it. And because speaking up would have meant war, not just with Diddy, but with the entire system that protects people like him. And I wasn't ready. But I am now." A heavy silence hung over the courtroom. No one breathed. The jury was frozen. And for the first time, even though Diddy didn't flinch, the shine around him began to fade. Jay-Z leaned back slightly. He hadn't raised his voice, he didn't need to. His words had already done what no camera or leaked footage ever could. They opened the door to a truth long buried beneath fame, fear, and silence. And this was only the beginning. The prosecutor stepped closer, locking eyes with Jay-Z, fully aware that every word from this point forward would send shockwaves far beyond the courtroom walls. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "you've described events and individuals that made you uncomfortable. I'd like to go deeper. Did you ever directly witness Mr. Sean Combs engaging in behavior with these male guests that could be considered inappropriate?" Jay-Z's jaw clenched. For a moment, he said nothing. The courtroom was suspended in total silence, holding its breath. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I saw things I can't unsee." The air in the room thickened instantly. "Where?" the prosecutor asked. "There was a house in the Hollywood Hills," Jay-Z began. "Very few people were ever invited there. One night after a small private gathering, most guests had left. I stayed behind because we had business to discuss. That's when I saw it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was walking down the hall, looking for the studio room. One of the doors was slightly open. Inside, I saw Diddy with a young man I didn't recognize. They weren't talking. It wasn't casual, it was intimate. And it was clear the other person wasn't in control. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Someone dropped a pen. The judge raised his hand to call for order, but even he looked shaken. "Did he see you?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Jay-Z replied. "He looked straight at me, didn't stop, just stared, like daring me to say something." The jury sat frozen, some in shock, others visibly shaken. Diddy's attorney scribbled furiously, but their face had gone pale. "Did you confront him?" Jay-Z looked down at his hands. "No. I left. Drove home. Didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I got a call from one of his assistants. She said, 'Hope you enjoyed the after-hours show. You didn't see anything, right?' Then she laughed. It wasn't a question. It was a warning." The prosecutor took a step back, clearly rattled herself. "Why do you think Diddy kept these interactions hidden?" "Because image was everything," Jay-Z answered. "He built a brand on power, swagger, dominance. The truth would have destroyed that image. And worse, there were rumors that some of those men didn't consent to what happened. That's where the line was crossed, from private to criminal." The judge's face had gone stone cold. Jay-Z's testimony wasn't gossip, it was sworn evidence from a man who had stood beside Diddy for over 2 decades. "Do you believe," the prosecutor asked slowly, "that others know what you know?" Jay-Z nodded. "Absolutely. Many of them are still in the industry. They stayed silent out of fear, fear of being blacklisted, fear of retaliation, and fear of what he might have on them." The courtroom began to stir again, the gravity of the moment sinking in. This was no longer just one man on trial, it was a mirror being held up to the entire industry. "Are you afraid?" she asked finally. Jay-Z looked directly at Diddy, who hadn't moved. "I was. But not anymore," he said. "I realized staying silent made me part of the machine. I'm not doing that anymore." That one sentence, quiet, simple, shattered decades of silence. It wasn't just testimony. It was defiance. It was a signal to everyone watching, the code of silence had been broken. And what came next would be irreversible. The courtroom sat stunned. Jay-Z had said more in 1 hour under oath than any headline had ever dared. And he was far from finished. The courtroom wasn't just silent now, it was paralyzed. Even the air felt heavier, as if Jay-Z's words had settled on everyone's shoulders. No one could look away. The prosecutor, steady but visibly shaken, took a deep breath and continued, her voice slightly softer. "Mr. Carter, you said earlier that Diddy used intimidation to keep people silent. Can you explain how, specifically?" Jay-Z didn't hesitate. Diddy didn't threaten people with fists, he didn't have to. His power came from reputation, leverage, and knowledge. He had files, digital, physical, even video, on people, artists, executives, journalists. It was like he kept receipts on everyone who stepped into his world. He glanced at the jury. You'd be at one of his parties, think it was just fun. The next day, you'd get a call from someone on his team, "Let's keep last night between us." Sometimes they'd send you a clip, just enough to remind you, "We're always watching." The room shifted. Jurors looked disturbed. Reporters typed furiously. Diddy sat stone still, but his clenched jaw gave away the storm under his skin. "Did you ever see one of these clips?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes. Once. He showed it to me casually, called it insurance. He smiled the whole time, like it was normal." "What was in it?" "I'm not going to describe it in detail," Jay-Z replied firmly. "But it involved a well-known actor, clearly under the influence, in a compromising situation with another man. The footage wasn't leaked. It wasn't even used. It was just kept, like a trophy." "Did Diddy ever say what he intended to do with it?" Jay-Z shook his head. "He didn't need to. I understood. That's how it worked, he never had to say the threat out loud. The implication was enough. And people went along with it. They had no choice, Jay-Z said. Speak out, and you lose your label, your tour, your deals. You get painted as unstable, a liar, a jealous ex-friend. Worst of all, he might release something, real or fake, that could ruin you. People feared what he had. I saw it happen. He paused, scanning the courtroom. That's why so many stayed in line, not because they supported him, but because they were prisoners of their own past. Some of it was true. Some was twisted. All of it was recorded. A wave of emotion swept the courtroom. One juror looked on the verge of tears, another sat with clenched fists, visibly restraining anger. Have you ever been threatened yourself? Jay-Z exhaled. Not directly, but there were signs. After I distanced myself, stopped going to events, backed out of deals, I started getting anonymous calls. Stories started spreading. People in the industry began pulling back. I knew what it was. Not obvious enough to trace, but loud enough to feel. And you still chose to come forward? I had to. My name was built on integrity and legacy. But if I stayed silent, knowing what I know, that legacy would be a lie. The prosecutor stepped back, momentarily overwhelmed. Jay-Z's testimony wasn't just damaging, it was devastating. It didn't just outline a man's behavior, it exposed a system. A carefully constructed empire of silence and fear. And it was crumbling, right there under oath. The judge looked pale. The court stenographer typed more slowly, trying to capture every word. Diddy hadn't moved, but he looked smaller with each passing second. Jay-Z had entered the courtroom as a witness. But now, he stood as a symbol that even in an industry dominated by power and money, truth could still break through. And he wasn't finished. Sitting calmly at the witness stand, hands folded, eyes focused on a spot far from Diddy, Jay-Z had already opened the vault of secrets. And the prosecutor now turned the key even further. Mr. Carter, she said, steady again, let's talk about the culture around Mr. Combs. You mentioned people were afraid. Were there moments when someone actually tried to speak out and was silenced? Jay-Z didn't hesitate. Yes. One in particular. He leaned forward slightly, and the entire courtroom leaned with him. There was a songwriter, young, talented, up-and-coming. He wrote for a few of Diddy's projects and was brought into the inner circle quickly. But he didn't fit the usual mold. He was sharp, smart, didn't drink much. One night after a party, he told me he had seen something that disturbed him. Said he walked in on Diddy with another man, in a situation that didn't seem consensual. A murmur swept through the room. Even the judge blinked multiple times. What happened to this songwriter? The prosecutor asked. He disappeared, Jay-Z said bluntly. Not literally, but professionally. 1 week, he was everywhere, writing credits, sessions, interviews. The next, his name was scrubbed, contracts pulled, reputation suddenly toxic. Rumors about his mental health began to circulate. He went back home to Atlanta. I haven't heard from him since. Do you believe that was intentional? I don't believe, I know. That's how it worked. One misstep, one whisper, one challenge, and Diddy's machine kicked in, lawyers, PR, quiet calls to executives. You didn't just lose work, you lost your identity. Did anyone else ever try to push back? Jay-Z nodded slowly. There was a female executive. She started quietly investigating what was happening in the back rooms, where people came and went without signing in. She was smart, discreet. A week later, she was accused of inappropriate behavior with an artist. Fired. No appeal. No hearing. Just gone. The courtroom fell into silence again. A pattern had formed. Those who got close to the truth were erased, as if they had never existed. Why didn't anyone in the industry stop him? The prosecutor asked. Jay-Z answered immediately. Because Diddy wasn't alone. Jay-Z's revelation had frozen the courtroom in place, but it was about to go deeper. The prosecutor, maintaining her composure, pressed on, "Mr. Carter, you've mentioned intimidation. Can you clarify how exactly was Diddy protected?" Jay-Z's voice remained steady. He wasn't just protected by lawyers. There were entire networks, executives, agents, handlers, people who benefited from his influence and simply looked the other way. He generated money, headlines, power. He built careers. And that kind of currency buys silence. The prosecutor nodded, then shifted. "Let's talk about the recordings." A visible reaction swept the room. The defense team tensed. Even Diddy's jaw twitched. "You previously mentioned Diddy keeping recordings of guests. Just how widespread was this?" Jay-Z's tone remained calm. "Widespread enough that no one who stayed at his homes ever knew if they were truly alone. Every house was wired. Some rooms more than others. Cameras were hidden, and vents, smoke detectors. His team disguised them well. I learned never to speak freely in any of his properties." "Did you ever see footage used as leverage?" "Yes. Many times. Huge names, people you'd never expect, got calls, threats, or subtle reminders about things they didn't even know were recorded." Jay-Z paused. "And Diddy kept a vault, a literal one. Fireproof, biometric lock, stored at a property in New Jersey. That's where the most sensitive material was." The room erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order, but it was too late. The media had their headline, "Diddy's Vault." The tapes. The blackmail. "Were you ever asked to handle those tapes?" "Yes. Once, he asked me to deliver a drive to an executive who was about to walk away from a deal. The message was clear: make sure he understands who he's dealing with. I refused. That's when our relationship changed." The prosecutor paused. "And yet, you remained silent." Jay-Z looked up. Because back then, silence felt safer than the truth. But now, the cost of silence is too high. That line hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't just a confession. It was an indictment of Diddy, of the system, of every person who chose safety over justice. And there was still more to uncover. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of law. It felt like a vault of secrets slowly being pried open. Every eye stayed on Jay-Z, not because he was famous, but because in that moment, he had become something more dangerous, a truth-teller with first-hand access to an untouchable empire. The prosecutor stepped forward again, her tone sharper. "Mr. Carter, you've detailed blackmail, threats, and recordings. But you remained close to Mr. Combs for years. Why?" Jay-Z leaned forward, voice low. "Because I was part of that world. I benefited from the access, the connections, the reach. Being close to Diddy opened doors. But it came with a price. You had to know when to look away. And I did, too many times." The room stayed still, not out of respect, but because everyone present was confronting the same truth. The industry's biggest names had thrived under a culture of silence. "Was there ever a moment you were directly asked to participate in covering something up?" "Yes. More than once. Sometimes they'd ask me to distract the media, leak a story, co-sign a lie, anything to bury a rumor. Never illegal on paper. But always unethical. Always meant to protect one man's image.